But sort of in that whiteboard presentation, you gave these 3 phases, and you're kind of implying that there'll be N phases to this whole evolution. And Cardano is just like the cutting edge. But if you look back to Bitcoin, how would you compare Cardano versus Bitcoin? Sort of where we are, how we started, and how it's going.
Okay. So what I did in that video, and I've done in a lot of media interviews, because I think it really helps people understand where we're at in the clock, is face things in terms of generations. And so I said, well, the first generation is Bitcoin. And really the problem Bitcoin was trying to solve is saying, every time we want to represent or move value, we need some sort of trusted third party to facilitate that. So can we build some sort of system where we can create some notion of value that can be teleported around the world, and it doesn't require a trusted third party? That's it. And it's done in a beautiful way because it didn't try to be anything else. It just was, you only have Bitcoin. You can only do one type of thing. You can only push it. You can do some things on the encumbrances of like, multi-sig and other things, but that's a one-trick pony as a system. And it wasn't really clear if that was going to work or not for a long time. It took several years to build up enough network effect and for Bitcoins to actually become valuable. And I'd say the inflection point was 2013. And at that point, it became a $1 billion market cap. There were like Silicon Valley startups, real exchanges were forming. And it got to a point where there was legitimacy behind the concept, and people started getting, this is a really incredible idea because I can evade capital controls with it. I can like move $10 billion of something from one country to another country in 5 minutes. It's like, I could never do that before. And, some said, this is incredible. Okay. The problem is the minute that people validate the idea, they immediately want something they don't have. So like the minute Elon can land a rocket, there's the next big thing, right? You've landed the Falcon 9, now you're on the Starship. Similarly, you say, okay, I want programmability with this thing. It's kind of like when JavaScript came to the web browser. You went from these static, perhaps pretty, but ultimately static non-interactive pages to YouTube and Google and Facebook and these amazing, rich, incredible experiences, because now you can actually interact with the user. You can program things. Stuff runs on their side. Stuff runs on your side. It's a beautiful two-way relationship. So that's what Ethereum effectively did. They bolted a programming language onto a blockchain, and they went from a certain use case to whatever your imagination can have, like sunshine and rainbows and unicorns and these types of things.
So what you're saying is Bitcoin is HTML and Ethereum is JavaScript?
Basically, yeah. It was like when JavaScript came, and with like JavaScript, it has all kinds of problems and issues.
I wonder who's Flash in this analogy. That's metaphor, but let's not.
Well, actually, there were plenty of ActiveX's and Flashes. NXT was an example of a failed to start, and BitShares was another example. So there were a lot of people who tried to add some notion of programmability in, or a different view of how these things should be done, and they were not as competitive. Ethereum kind of came out at that JavaScript moment. Okay, the minute you have that, then suddenly you have ICOs and DeFi and STOs and NFTs and all these word salads of things. And then people start using it, they get frustrated. Why? Because it's too slow, it's too expensive, it doesn't talk to the things they want it to talk to. And also, it gets too big to manage itself. When you're small, you have founders and foundations, and you have trusted actors and core developers, and you can feed them with pizzas. You know them, you can meet them, you can shake their hands at conferences. When you're a multi-billion person system, you're too large to be able to do that. For example, we had the Shelley Summit last year. We invited Vint Cerf to come to the summit. Vint's a brilliant guy, and he had created the internet with Bob and the rest of the gang. And, back in those days, it was such a simple, small system that, one of their students, they said, hey, you need to test it. He created a video game just to kind of test the thing. And you could call the guy on the other side and say, are you seeing this? Are you getting the signal? They used to have an actual address book for email addresses. Yeah. So you'd open up the book and you'd look it up. And now look at the internet. It's like, who's in charge of that? It's this gargantuan, network, and there's no group of people you can bring in. And thus, the internet evolves very slowly, you see. And so that's the problem, is that you have this situation where you want to do lots of utility. You want to do a lot of things. You want to be a financial operating system and, be everything to everyone. But then your rate of evolution slows down as your rate of adoption speeds up. So that's one of the other design goals of the third generation. It's not good enough just to do things better, faster, cheaper, and have consistent cost, with your population growing, or talk to everything, your Wi-Fi moment, you also need a system that can govern itself at a scale of millions to billions of people who have divergent interests. Some cases, ice pick and eye divergent interests. They really hate each other, and they don't get along. And so that's what we termed a third generation cryptocurrency. And there's a lot of people attempting to compete in that space. There's Tezos and Algorand and ICP and Polkadot and so forth. And each and every one of them kind of brings a different blend of things that they value. So it's not completely equal between scalability, interoperability, and sustainability. Some people were very focused on high throughput, lots of transactions per second. Other people very focused on governance, like Tezos is like the governance chain, and they were one of the first to do a self-amending ledger. And other people are like Aeon or Polkadot. They're really thinking carefully about how do we build a nice interoperable ecosystem. With Cardano, we tried to actually tackle all three at the same time, which is one of the reasons why we were a little slower out of the gate. We had to write a lot more protocols, but we think we've kind of come up with a beautiful interlocking design for all of them. And again, the point is not to get it perfect, but rather get those just right set of evolutionary factors that when you click the domino, it just self-evolves into what you need it to get to.
Allow me to stretch the metaphor farther. If Bitcoin is HTML, there's HTML5. If Ethereum is JavaScript, JavaScript with V8 has become quite fast, it runs much of the internet. So the argument could be that eventually everything will be JavaScript, or maybe you could say eventually everything will be HTML, and it just be a bunch of different tools that generate that HTML. So is it possible that just like Rousseau, we eventually return to generation 1, Bitcoin, or we return to generation 2, Ethereum, as we, at the end of this journey?
The problem is your tail is wagging the dog there. And it's not, you have a situation where you're so focused on the technology that you're failing to understand that there's still Daisy here. You still have the user. And where's the app store? Where's the one-click install? Where's the use and utility? All these layer 2 protocols and these DeFi applications, in 5 years, they're completely protocol and blockchain agnostic. Because at the end of the day, they care about liquidity, operating cost, and user experience. It's so preposterous and absurd for somebody to say, oh, well, I'm going to go build my application, get on the Apple Store, and I am going to use Amazon as my web host. And no matter what happens, I will always use Amazon, even if the operating cost is crazy.
I see.
You see? And so we're just in a unique period of history where there's a network effect around some initial infrastructure, and people tend to be building around that. But every single one of the top DeFi providers are, if they're getting successful into a certain network effect, they're having the multi-chain conversation. So I don't really believe in a winner-takes-all maximalist view of, well, there's going to be some protocol that becomes the God protocol. First, because they evolve too quickly. Second, the incentives aren't aligned for that. TCP/IP didn't have a token connected to it. There was no financial incentive where if TCP/IP got adopted over something else, they'd make some big company crazy amounts of money. It was a useful piece of infrastructure. So I think that the third generation is going to be as defined by the social components and the usability components as it is by the technological capabilities of the system. Really, what these technological capabilities gave you was the ability to demonstrate a proof of concept and say these things are possible. Kind of like Xerox PARC. When Steve and Bill came in, they said, wow, you have networked computers, object-oriented programming, and a GUI. And this is like, what was it, 70s? It's like, wow, it's like incredible. But none of that was an actual product. That wasn't a Macintosh. But it was enough to get the idea. And then it was a race to how do we productize something like that. And in that case, it actually took several decades to roll out that vision that those guys had. And I think that's what Bitcoin and Ethereum did. But what's unique about this is normally you throw away the prior experiments. With these things, these are self-evolving systems. So it's entirely possible to, Joe Rogan quote, to evolve Bitcoin to a point where it could become a third generation system if desired, as some amalgamation of layer 1 and layer 2 protocols. And it's the same for Ethereum. In fact, Vitalik is throwing away Ethereum and replacing it with Ethereum 2 because he recognizes he needs to upgrade and evolve the system. And that's what makes it fun, because the techniques and methodologies that they've chosen to evolve and upgrade this system are distinctly different from the ones that we've chosen. And we have no idea which one's actually going to win, but we learn from each other and we co-evolve from each other. So you're running like all these experiments in real time in a giant marketplace, and Maybe they'll consolidate. Maybe they'll stay divergent. I mean, look at big tech. You have Google, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook. They all coexist, and they're trillion-dollar companies. Some cases with TCP, it consolidates to one standard, and that's what we end up using.